It's not usual that I'm willing to recognize that a movie may be as good as a book. That is, we're talking about important books and important works of literature. But in the case of V for Vendetta, written also by Alan Moore, I am inclined to admit that sometimes the movie can be as good as the book. Maybe some would argue even better. I am not sure. But V for Vendetta was made into a motion picture in 2004, 2005, starring Natalie Portman, Hugo Weaving, and their performances are just extraordinary in the movie, and I think it captures in a beautiful way the intent of the book itself. Now, in keeping with our practice of trying to understand these novels better through political philosophy and trying to understand political philosophy better by means of comics and graphic novels, let me at this point introduce the writings on anarchy by the Russian philosopher Mikhail Bakunin. There are other people who have written about anarchy. There's some pretty sophisticated stuff out there, some far more contemporary. But if you had to identify one person that you would start with and try and understand or see a philosophical argument for anarchy, then Bakunin is the person that you would start with. So anyone who's going to write on anarchy has a tough job. Anarchy, literally means no authority, no government, from its Greek derivation, and that's a hard argument to make. Some would say that an argument for anarchy is always theoretical, and it always will be theoretical because it's not possible. However, and so for that reason, some people dismiss any kind of writing on anarchy. What's the point? Well, I think there is a point. Anarchy is useful, at the very least, as an ideal. It would be libertarianism taken as far as it possibly could be taken. And although we may not be able to craft such a government, because in a sense it's no government, right? Even though we may not be able to create a situation in which anarchy would be possible, nonetheless, if we hold it up as an ideal, then that puts the burden of the argument, the burden of proof, if you will, on those who would argue for more and more government. In other words, we'd have to not only ask the question why, but rather the better question, we would not simply ask the question why not, but we would have to ask the better question why. Why should we add this feature of government? Why should we add this agency? Why do we need these laws? So it changes the perspective on government, and for that reason, as an ideal, I think it's very useful. So how do we pair that up with V for Vendetta? V for Vendetta involves a political conflict between a fascist government on the one hand and a push for anarchy on the other hand. At times it's violent. In fact, in the opening scenes of the movie, it's quite violent as major institutions in London are destroyed by bombs. And if we look at the writing of Bakunin, he acknowledges that in order to bring about anarchy, there probably has to be a destructive phase. That's going to be dangerous, but it probably will be necessary. So Bakunin argues that there are at least three criteria necessary for government, necessary for no government, necessary for anarchy. The first one is you have to have a sentiment among a large part of the population that the present circumstance is insufferable. It can't be tolerated. Something has to change. And so in this case, you've got, once again, a fascist government, very oppressive, abusive with its authority. And so this requirement of something that's intolerable seems to be made by the book and portrayed in the movie. A second requirement, according to Bakunin, for the possibility of anarchy is a belief that change can actually happen. That is, there has to be some expectation, some hope that change is possible in this intolerable situation. The third, and that seems to be the case in V for Vendetta. There seems to be some aspiration, some hope. That hope is driven by V himself, and his co-star, played by Natalie Portman, absorbs that hope and seems to be able to carry that hope at the same time. So the movie seems to meet that threshold. Now, the third requirement, according to Bakunin, is perhaps the most difficult, and we might agree this is where attempts at anarchy tend to flounder. And on this point, I'm not sure that the book or the movie gives us an adequate answer. Rather, it brings us up to a point in which we think things may go somewhere, but according to Bakunin, we have to have a vision of where things are going. That is, we have to know what things are going to look like after the change occurs. That's the tough one. That's the tough one for the philosopher of anarchy. That's the tough one for the author of a graphic novel, because again, there is an inherent contradiction. That is, we need to know what things are going to look like. At the same time, we are trying to eliminate as much government as possible, or all government. So how do you reconcile those two? It's not easy.